instructor here at Crooked Tree Art Center. Really pleased to see so many of you here in person. Don't know how many of you are there on Zoom, but hello, glad you're here. This is Coffee at 10. So I know I see some familiar faces. If some of you are new, this is a series that Crooked Tree Art Center has for so many years that nobody can tell me when it began. And it is just a program where we bring artists in for talks, for performances, for conversations, just to create an opportunity for our community to connect through the arts and learn something new. So since COVID, we moved this program online and have been hosting these events via Zoom. And so now we're hybrid and reaching audiences here in Petoskey and all across the US. So we're really excited about that. At that time, I think it was about last fall, we started creating our series of programs in conjunction with our exhibition and began offering the series weekly. So this event today actually concludes our summer series. So it's been a wonderful run of talks related to our summer exhibitions. We have a solo show that's ending Saturday here by artist Henry Horenstein, Boston-based photographer who did a series on honky-tonk photos. And we also had a solo show, or have a solo show that will conclude on Saturday by GHAR artist in residence Lynn Bennett Carpenter. It's a phenomenal solo show in our Bonfield Gallery. Be sure to walk through that space if you haven't already. And that's a wonderful segue to today's presentation because this was an exhibition that came to Crooked Tree through partnership with GHAR artists in residence. So first, when I get into my acknowledgements and thank you, big shout out to the Kelsos and GHAR artists in residence. This is a wonderful program in GHAR, Michigan, where they bring in artists of all kinds. We have visual artists, writers, composers, musicians who join us in Northern Michigan for short residencies, usually 2 weeks, right? Where they get a time to really get into the community and have studio time just to create, to make, to reset. They brought in a phenomenal lineup of artists over several years now. And when we are able, we partner with them and bring those guest artists in to share their work with Crooked Tree audiences. And that's what we have here today. Before I introduce our guests, just a couple more thank yous. First, a big shout out to our members near and far. Our members are what make this program possible, allow us to make it free and open to the public, and continue to offer free exhibitions and all of the programming that we do. So a big thank you to Crooked Tree Art Center members. Another thank you to Roast and Toast, our sponsor for our pastries and coffee for those of us in person. So that's a big thank you to make that event lots of fun and caffeinated. And thank you to Charlevoix County Community Foundation who sponsored this summer series of programs. So thank you very much to them. So that's my thank yous. If you want to know more about what Crooked Tree has going on, we have brochures at the desk from our summer series of programs, upcoming fall classes, and then Crooked Tree Art Center has Art Walk tonight. Okay, so this is a project that we've been doing with downtown Petoskey. You can go around to area shops and find artists working and highlighted throughout the community. And we have a little brochure with a map of participating locations there at the desk. All right, so today concludes our summer series, and we have our special guest, Rashaun Rucker. And I'm really delighted for Rashaun to talk to us today, not least of which because Sue Kelso let me know, hey Liz, you're in for a treat. She said, he has a story, he describes himself as a storyteller who also draws. So it's going to be a great conversation today and a really special opportunity to bring an artist like Rashaun up here because he really is a professional who's been working for many years. GHAR Artist in Residency typically selects their guest artists through an application process, which has become increasingly competitive over the years. But Rashaun is here because he was actually selected by curator Juana Williams as the Elevating Diverse Voices residency. So Juana is now curator at the Detroit Institute of the Arts and is well versed in artists working across the US and highlighted Rashaun specifically for this opportunity, and super delighted to have you up here, Rashaun. Rashaun describes himself as a product of North Carolina Central University and Marygrove College, and just let us know that he's about to start his graduate studies at Cranbrook. He makes photographs, prints, and drawings, and has won more than 40 national and state awards for his work. In 2008, Rucker became the first African-American to be named Michigan Press Photographer of the Year. I think it's also awesome to say that he won a National Emmy Award in 2008 for documentary photography of the pit bull culture in Detroit. Rucker was a Maynard Fellow at Harvard in 2009 and a Hearst Visiting Professional in the Journalism Department at UNC Chapel Hill in 2013. In 2014, Rucker was awarded an artist residency at the Red Bull House of Art. In 2016, honored as a modern man by Black Enterprise magazine. I can keep going and going and going. But I think we maybe want to hear from Rashaun himself about his recent accomplishments and the creative work that he's going to share with us today. So please join me in thanking and welcoming Rashaun.
How are you doing today? Hey, when people go by. I'm really just a country boy from North Carolina who figured out how to, I guess, make a living at being creative, which was, I don't think my grandparents ever thought I would do. I remember I first got, well, when she talked about the photography, so I worked at the Detroit Free Press for 17 years. The first 10 years as a photojournalist, the second 7 as deputy director of visuals. So I was over video, photo, but most of all, and what I loved the most was I was a person who dictated visually what the paper looked like every day. So when you would wake up every day, it was my hand that you were looking at for 7 years. And so I truly do miss that. Like that was and I miss being informed. I think I was probably the most well-read person around because I would literally have to read the paper from like front to back every day, just to make sure there was really no visual miscues. And I didn't have to do that, but I just always was like panic-stricken about things. And I remember it paid off one night because I was at home and I was working remotely and I didn't have to, all I was responsible for was the front. The people under me were responsible for the rest of the sections. And I would just go through them at my home in the middle of the night. And I remember one night there was a story about a guy who had sexually assaulted an animal. And I'm reading it and I was like, oh my God, it's the wrong picture. That's not the guy, it's another guy. And I called at midnight and I was like, oh my God, someone please answer the phone. Because people usually left the office around like 12:30. And the guy picked up and I'm like, Joe, that's not the guy. I was like, we're gonna get sued in the morning, like, please swap that out. And he was like, oh my God, you just caught it. And so like, things like that had me living in fear for like years. You know, you deal with a lot of pictures throughout the paper and it's just like, you always want to be back checking. And I remember walking in the next day and the publisher was like, oh my God, I owe you dinner. Like you saved us so many heartaches. And I was like, you just never know. And what it was there was 2 pictures in the story. There was a picture of the convicted person and there was a picture of his attorney. So that was the way that, you know, my life kind of switched, and I'll tell you kind of my little winding road first. But I remember when I got hired there, I told my great grandfather, I was like, I got a job with the newspaper, and they're gonna like, I'm gonna go up there and work. And he was like, pay you to take pictures. He couldn't even fathom that. Like in his own mind, he was like, that doesn't sound like work. That sounds like something else. But this was a person who owned his own landscaping company for 30 years. So like work to him was backbreaking, different type of work. And I remember I was telling Bill on the way up here, like that was probably like my biggest regret in life was having this argument with him before he passed because he wanted me to take over the company. And I was like, I don't want to do that. Like, so my dad didn't take it, and I didn't take it. And then we just sold everything off. And I kind of like, when I said it, I kind kind of like, I wish I would have said that different, because I was like, I don't want to work like that. And it was almost like an insult, but I didn't mean it to be. I just was like, I worked every summer with her from 12 to 22, so I knew what type of work that was. And I was like, I'm not cut out to do that for like the rest of my life. And I remember the last thing he said, well, does it have benefits? And I said, yeah. He's like, okay. Like the health benefits is like everything, which now that I'm older, it is everything. You can never really be afford to be sick. As somebody who has a pacemaker and a defibrillator, benefits is a huge thing. But I grew up in North Carolina and grew up in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, which is on the western side near Asheville. So my mother's family is from there. My father's from Detroit. So he went to college in North Carolina. That's where my parents met. He never went back. So I would spend most of my summers between working with my granddad and coming to Detroit. And so I was familiar with the free press because my grandparents got the newspaper. And so that kind of started me thinking and like, loving visual things. But the way I got interested in art, believe it or not, was professional wrestling. People are always like, this is a really dumb story. But so my grandmother, who lived in North Carolina, and my grandfather were huge wrestling fans. And that's what they did on the weekends. They watched wrestling every Saturday night at 6:05 to 8:05 was either Mid-South Wrestling or Georgia Professional Wrestling. And when wrestling would come to town, twice a year they would go and they would take me. And it was like the most amazing thing to me as a kid. But at the time, there were no wrestling toys. And I was like, man, they make all kinds of toys, but there's no wrestling toys. And so my mother was like, why don't you draw the wrestlers yourself and make them? And my parents were teachers. So the first things I drew were like Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair, and like all these wrestlers. And I would color them, my mom would laminate them, and it became like these paper dolls. And so that was like my first foray into like drawing, was just, learning how to draw something, what they say, like, invention is the mother of necessity. It was because I needed something that wasn't readily available. And so between that and Marvel Comics, I became the weird kid in the neighborhood who wouldn't go outside and was just in the house drawing. My dad would be like, you need to go outside with the rest of the kids and play in this room locked away drawing all day. But now he's like my son, the artist. Back then I was like, now he's like super proud, but back then I was like the weird kid in the neighborhood. Like, and that's what anybody from high school says when they see me, like, you still drawing? Yeah. Because I literally took a sketchbook to school every day, like from elementary school to like college, I just had a sketchbook. And that was my safe haven. That was like everything to me. Because I would tell people, like, you couldn't get anything else, you could get a paper and a pencil. Like, it was something that was really readily available. And probably it was middle school where I realized that this was going to be my path, even though I didn't really know it. I had a middle school art teacher, Kathy Williams, that I'm still in contact with to this day. And when I was in the 6th grade and I got in her art class, she said, oh, you're really talented at this. So she went to my parents' house and was like, I'm going to stay after school with him every day for an hour until he leaves middle school to work with him. She was like, he could really be an artist. So she did that for like 3 years. And I walked to school like a mile, so it wasn't like crazy. And then the same thing I went to high school. I got to high school. You go into these schools, you don't know the teachers. They're like new teachers every time. I got to high school, and that art teacher was named Tony Idle. And I was in class maybe for a couple of months. And then one day I came to class and I walked in and he had a closet, big closet, and the kiln was in there, the clay and all that stuff. And he pointed to the door and I was like, what's he pointing at? And I opened the door and there was one desk in there with a chair. And he was like, from here on out, that's where you have art class at. Mm-hmm. So he would teach me different art than the other kids in the class. And I was like, why is he doing that? And one day I asked him, I want to be in here. I want to just like be out with the rest of the kids. And he opened the door and he was like, look at them. And they were like playing paper football. Like, you're not like the rest of these kids. Like, you actually care about this. And he was like, art is like for them just an elective home ec or something, like they're not. He's like, you actually want to be an artist. And so he saw it, and I like commend him because I thought it was like the biggest punishment in the world. And you know, just it's really just by like the grace of God, those people who like kind of pick you up along the way. And I remember being so happy my junior year because I went in there and it was another desk, so it was another kid in the closet. That kid ended up being an artist too. He went to SCAD in Savannah. And so I was like, thank God it's another person that's closet for me. And so we could talk and like banter with each other. And like, he was really good. He was like a year or two behind me. And, you know, when I left, I still kind of was like, oh, I'll make it as an artist. Like, just going to go to college. And I was really only familiar with North Carolina Central University, small Black college in Ghana, because my parents went there. And it was like, you know, your parents go to a certain school, it's like, you go to homecoming, you go to all these alumni events, so that's like the school you know. At the time I was dating someone and I went to school with them. And my mom was like, this is the stupidest thing you've ever done. You don't go to school because you got a girlfriend. So clearly a year later, I was back at the other school because I was like, this was dumb. I didn't even have a art curriculum for me. I just followed a woman out there. But my dad and they let me make my own mistakes. They were like, well, go on, you know, do whatever. Not only did I come back, I lost the entire year from that school because none of it transferred. They had a different system of classes. So I showed up at that school. And that was interesting because once you get to college, you're around people who are like-minded, who are also talented. And so I had to like, now you got to work your way up because there's seniors and juniors who are much better than you, more experienced than you do. And the teacher I had there was Dr. Bella, he was Ethiopian. He taught me how to draw, like, even on a different level. But he never gave me an A in any of his classes. And I was like, I am by far the best drawer in this class, and I have not gotten an A. And he would give other people A's, and I just never could understand it. I just got B in every class, like 5 straight drawing classes. And he never called me by my name. He would always call me Chief. He said, oh, Chief, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, and we would have student art shows. My parents would show up. And my mom would come in, he said, oh, Rashaun is doing it. I'm like, well, clearly he knows my name. Like, I don't know why he's not saying my name. So years pass, I meet somebody from Ethiopia, and I was telling him about it. I said, oh, he called me Chief. He said, oh, in Ethiopia, that's a term of respect. Which I never knew because he never told me that. Which I thought was funny. I was like, that would really help my courage. You told me like you had a fun respect for me and like you wasn't punishing me. And so we still talk. And I remember like 10 years ago, I was like, you never gave me an A. He was like, you wouldn't have gotten any better if I would have gave you an A. Like I had to always continue to like push you to be better. And he was the person that made me like start to realize that like my work had to say something. Because one day we had a thing, he was like, I want you to draw a portrait, bring it in. And I went home and I worked on this portrait for 2 weeks. And I was like, this is glorious. I don't know why, but it was a portrait of Fred Sanford, the red fox. I'm like, it's weird because now my mother has it over the fireplace. People come in and like, are you related to some Fred? I'm like, no. Like you would put a family portrait at. I'm like, it's just a thing I did in college. And I bought it in, and he was like, it's really good, but it doesn't mean anything. He was like, what's it mean? I was like, portrait of Red Fox. And he's like, you gotta make the work that talks about something. Art has to challenge people, it has to ask questions, it can't just be proven. He was like, it's almost like a birthday cake, it's like the icing is so amazing, but what does the cake taste like? He was like, you have to get to like a secondary level sophistication in your work. And so he was the first person that kind of challenged me in that way to just, you have to read, you have to study, you have to make more important work. And I don't know if he was having these conversations with other people, but he definitely was having them with me about my work and my grades. And he was like, because you can get the degree, but he was like, you might not ever be an artist if you don't know how to like take this next step. And so you're probably wondering, like, how in the world did he get from there to the free press? So at the same exact time in college, we had a museum on campus, but the only time students worked was ever in that museum was once a year for the student show. And my sophomore year, we had a student show. My parents was there, and a guy came out of nowhere. He was like, "Did you draw that?" I was like, "Yeah." He was like, "I'm Professor Levitt. I teach photography. I want you to take my class." And I was like, "No, I don't have time." And it's not required for me to graduate. Because at the time, photography was in the communications department and journalism. It wasn't in art. It was in a whole different department. And I was like, I'm not doing it. I've already messed up enough of my parents' time and money. And, I just came from another school and I pledged a fraternity and missed a whole other semester of grades because I was partying. And I was living my best life in college. So I was already way behind that 8 ball. Because my grandmother was like, "You've been in college a long time." And get close though. And so at one point, my mom was like, "Look, you need to file for an independent student so you get your own loans." It was like, you're on a different calendar than we set. And so the guy came in, he just badgered me for like 2 weeks about it. And I was like, "Why would this guy just let me be?" And he said, "Okay, you don't have to take the class, don't sign up, just come sit in the class, just sit in the back of the class." It's like, "I don't even have a camera." He's like, "I'll give you a camera." They like gave me all the equipment. I sat in the back of the class, I took the class. It was okay, like my work wasn't breathtaking. It was like people playing basketball on campus and like just stuff around campus. And at the end, he was like, "I have a good friend of mine who's the photo director at your hometown paper. So say like, he needs an intern, I want you to interview for it." I was like, he was like, "Look, just do it for professional development, no matter whether you get the job or not, just go do it." Drove home, it took like almost 2 hours to do this interview. I show up and the guy's like, "Is this what you have?" He's like, "This is really not that great. It's like really raw." And I was like, "Well, I'm not a journalism major. I'm not a photography major either. Like, just took the class because he wanted me to take it." And he said, "Well, what's your major?" And I was like, "Art with a concentration in drawing and printmaking." And he was like, "Well, do you have a drawing portfolio?" I was like, "Yeah, I do. It's in the car." He was like, "Let me see it." He was like, "It looks great. I don't know anything about art, but it looks cool." He was like, "Well, my wife is teaching drawing at Wake Forest University." He's like, "Let me take it home to her." He was like, "You come back and get it Monday." So I come back Monday to pick up the portfolio. I walk in his office and I said, "What did your wife say?" He said, "She told me to hire you." And I was like, she was like, "Based on the drawing portfolio, she said I should hire you." So that summer, he taught me like everything they could teach me about being a photojournalist. And this was like pre-digital camera. So this is, you got to use wing lenses, develop your own film, mix your own chemicals. And because I was a low man on the totem pole, I mixed everybody chemicals. So they would call me like chemical boy because I was like the person making everybody's chemicals. Because that was kind of like my price to pay for learning. And finished the internship, and they started hiring me on the weekends, like every break I had for school. And so that guy referred me to a person at the Atlanta newspaper, and they gave me an internship. And I remember, like, I never saw the letter. I saw the letter years later. Somebody, like the guy mailed it to me, was like, "Oh, I found this letter." And it was a letter from the guy on my hometown paper. He was like, "Rashaun was nowhere near the most talented photographer we've ever hired. His work ethic is unquestionable." And he was like, "He made more advancement than any intern I ever had in any stretch of time." And he was like, "The sky's the limit for him if you just give him a chance." So that led to an internship at the Atlanta paper, which led to an internship at the New York Times, which led to the Free Press offering me an internship that I did not take. Because at the time I was in school, I was like, "Oh, I can't really do this. Like, I haven't graduated." So then they came back and were like, "What about a year-long thing?" And I was like, "No, I still got other obligations." And they were like, "Well, come interview for a full-time job. It's gonna come over." And I remember coming there and I'm thinking, one, it was like Nancy Andrews, who was the director at the time, was so she was like, "Oh, you got family here?" I was like, "Yeah, my grandparents, cousins." She was like, "Are you coming to Detroit at any point?" And I was like, "My cousins get married, but I don't think I'm going because like I'm a college student, can't afford flights and all that stuff. And I'm not in the wedding, so I'm not really important to the wedding either." And she was like, "Well, how about I fly you up there for your cousin's wedding and we just have an interview during that point?" And so that's what happened. I came up and I did an interview, went back home. She said the same thing. She was like, "Man, this is wrong, but I can see the potential in it." I remember some of the people was like, "I can't believe we haven't hired somebody fresh out of college for like 30 years. Because the Free Press is a major paper. It's like a big market. And so when you come there, it's because you've worked 10 years somewhere else. You've been at the Macomb Daily, or you've been at some small paper in another part, and mostly away from Detroit. Most of the people that hired, they were like other parts of the country. So I was like, oh, I get that job. You know, it was great though. It was super nice for her to do that. And she called me when I got back, and she was like, "Oh, how's everything going? Like, send me work." She like constantly send me whenever we take a picture. She would write critiques and send it back to me and just keep doing that. And one day she called me and I was like crying. She's like, "What's wrong?" I was like, "Somebody broke in my car and they stole my art portfolio." So they stole all my drawings and they stole my camera bag. And I was like distraught. More about the drawings. I was like, this is like all the drawings for the past 2 years of college. And she was like, "I'm really sorry about that." I wake up like 2 days later, there's a huge box on my porch, FedEx box. And it's like all new camera equipment. And it's like a little note for her to say, "Just keep taking pictures of Nancy." And I called her and I was like, "What'd you do that for?" She was like, "I just believe in you, just keep doing it." And so like I sent her another like little batch of photos. She flies me back to Detroit. We have like a longer interview, like a 3-day interview. And I get back home and like the answer machine is like, "You got the job you want." But this was, and she was like, "And we'll hold it till you graduate." So this was February. I didn't start the Free Press till August. So like she was like, "I'll wait on you." And I got there and I really suffered like the first couple of months. I was like, holy crap, I do not belong here. I'm way out of my league. Because at the time I'm looking at it, it's like you got Mary Schroeder and all these people who like just winning awards, galore, they've been there forever, and like one of 25 photographers. And so I'm shooting buildings every day, basically like something I can't screw up. Like don't have time to shoot this building for the business section. You know, and I was like, oh, I gotta get better. So she would give me homework assignments. She would be like, "Take this plastic cup to your house tonight. I want you to bring me back 50 different photos of it. None of them can be alike." And so she would teach me like how to see things differently. You know, she would maybe put up a clothesline in my backyard, like hang clothes and shoot the clothes and like change the depth of field and like look at how the clothes are hanging and all these different things and the compositions. So we would do that for like the whole first year almost, like just me and her. And she was like, "I did not hire you for right now. Like, I hired you to buy you what you can be." And like, when I won the national Emmy, she was like the first person to come in the corner. She was like, "It's been 5 years, almost 5 years to the date." And she was like, "Look at what you've done in 5 years." But I think it's just that thing where you always need that person. So like, somebody's always in the gap. And that's what I tell people. I'm like, I'm really in a position for you is just been like a lot of grace, a lot of like love, and a lot of people helping, work ethic. You know, I tell students when I'm teaching them, I'm like, you know, how are you doing this and this? And I was like, the biggest difference for me and you is that I draw probably 8 more hours a day. It's a practice, it's a thing. I tell my son the same thing. He's a far better drawer at 12 than I was at that age. And I always see him balling on paper and getting frustrated. I can't draw. You're not supposed to. 44 to 12. Like, I was like, look at my draw. I'm still balling on paper. And I was like, "You're really good at video games." He was like, "How much do you play video games?" He's like, "A lot." And I was like, "Imagine how good you be at know too, it's a different time. Like I always tell people, I didn't have distractions. No video games, no phone, there was no iPad. I just had art supplies. And that was the one thing I could get. Like growing up, I always joke and tell people the two things my parents never said no to was church clothes and art supplies. Not like I ever wanted extra church clothes, but you can get church clothes. If you came in there and said my suit don't fit anymore, they would miraculously find $100 to get you a suit. And they would buy art supplies. And I don't think they knew, but they were being supportive, whether they knew it or not. It was like they would save money for me to go to these art camps. They were like really expensive. I mean, $1,000 back then was still a lot of money. It was a lot back then to send a kid, a high school kid to art camp. So, and though that was one of the places where I really like honed my skill set and started figuring out, okay, like I gotta be good at this, gotta be better. So, you know, it's just a lot of help. I always want to tell people that, like, you know, there's a lot of factors that go into this, like, and you know, work ethic is the biggest thing. I always tell my students, I say, I can give you everything, but I can't give you that. And that is by far the most important thing, is how much you're willing to work at something. And I tell them, I say, I see people with less talent beat out talented people every day, because they are willing to just literally do more work than them. And that was how I lived my life. Like, I was never the most talented photographer, the most talented artist. I just outworked people. And, you know, that's the thing I always tell myself. I can't give you work ethic and I can't make you be on time. Those are choices. Whether you come to class on time, whether you do this on time, and how much time you spend honing. Because what we do is the craft. You spend all your time like getting good at your craft. You know, I get so focused on the drawing that I can't even hear things most of the time. It's probably why I'm divorced, because my wife was like, you never was listening to me. I just be at a table and it's like, I can't even hear my kids sometimes. They literally have to come up and be like, hey, I'm talking to you about this one. Because I'm like, I always call it my hallelujah moment. It's weird, I always tell people like, I feel closer to God when I'm like drawing. Because it feels like it's like weirdly out of body to me in some weird way. Like there's sometimes I draw things and I look back and I'm like, I don't even know how I drew that. Like I feel like my arm is just doing its own thing. And it's that type of like special relationship with what I'm making. And so I love that. I always tell people to come to my show. I'm like, oh, this is also beautiful. This is for you. I could care less about it. Like my joy is in the making. I'm a maker. It's almost like making this thing. Once you make it, it's made. It's like, but my joy would be in putting this together. Like I always tell the people in the galleries that represent me, I'm like, this is the residue of my joy. Like my joy is in the literal making of something. And once I'm done, I'm like, what can I make now? Because my mind is like gerbil wheel. I was telling somebody at the Open Studios that there's literally times when I'm like sleep and have a dream or I think about something. I will get up and like sketch it out, draw it, write notes about it. I thought about this today. Like this is something that I can work on later, and I did the same thing. I just came here. I just finished a milling fellowship at the University of Michigan while I was teaching and just doing work, like a whole body of work for them. And they came to me and they were like, oh, we got this residency, this fellowship we want you to do. This is the budget. And I'm like, oh my God, the budget is big. They were like, do you have anything you want to make? And I'm like, yes. From 2 years ago, I went and grabbed a sketchbook from 2 years ago. It was like I showed them the entire concept of it. But I never made it because I knew it was going to take like $30,000 to make it. And I was like, now I have the money to like bring this to complete fruition. And so I've literally been making things that are like years behind in my mind. And so even I have an upcoming show at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Detroit, Celebration. It's something I drew in 2018. And I just keep, like a little Rolodex. it's like, revisit this, revisit this, revisit this, revisit this, you know, grow where you can. That's what I tell people, just grow where you can. My studio is in my house. I've never had a studio. I only have studios when I come to GHAR or residencies. Like, I have 2 sons. One is 15, he's special needs. He's autistic, he wears a diaper, still have to feed him. So being his caretaker is like the crux of my life. That's like the biggest priority. So I always work in the house, I'm close to him. And I can always just, when I'm tired, just go to bed. Just get up and be like, oh, I'm done for the day, let's go lay down. But it's more so about, you know, he's in my life. So being there for him, making sure he's comfortable, you know, making sure he is like happy and eating and listening to the Simpsons theme song like 10,000 times. He loves to do repetitive things. When people visit, they're like, you see that? I was like, I've trained myself not to pay attention to it, because it's like, if you did hearing a song 1,000 times, it probably drive me crazy. So I don't even hear it. Because my mom will visit me like, that was Bobby. I don't even hear it. It's like, you know, so I think that's part of it, but I also think, to a larger point, being an artist and being able to focus in on something and being that patient making something was kind of like this divine thing, this skill set that made me a better parent to be a caregiver. Because it made me more, I was already patient. You know, and people was like, oh man, you're like a patient person. Like, well, you know what I did and what I do every day. Like, standing in line at the bank ain't the worst thing that's gonna happen to me today. Because I was standing in line and people like, standing in line for an hour. This is probably the least of my worries. I did it when I came to Toski the other day to get some wood. I went to Home Depot and the saw was broken. And the guy said, it's gonna take like an hour and a half to fix it. And I'm like, I just waited. And he was like, you waited like the entire. I was like, what do you mean? Is yelling at the guy fixing the saw gonna help it? It's being mean to you, who's like not getting paid enough to deal with craziness every day. Like, no, I just sit here and wait. Like, I go look at garbage bags or some other useless thing that I don't need. I ended up buying like what did I buy? I bought like an ink pen that was a screwdriver. You know, like you end up buying clip on like, I ever need this to do anything with this. And I was like, you know, like the kid in me was like, oh my God, it's a pen, it's a screwdriver. And I was like, I need this. And I was like, I'll probably never see it again in life, but you know, it's those type of things. So I feel like art has prepared me for like many things. So I'll show you some work that I've been doing. So I've been doing a set of drawings that I started 2015, maybe. This is like the first one. And I wanted to do some work about redlining and conditioning and mental conditioning and how things affect people. And I was like, not quite sure how I want to do it, but it started off with a trip to PF Chang restaurant. A lot of things start off stupid in my life. My mind just works in a weird way. So I was in Detroit going to my grandmother's house. Sometimes you know how family lives like near each other. So like a cousin that lived across the street and an uncle that lived here, they all live in the same street, which was great growing up as a kid because I had like 3 different choices for dinner. They're like, oh, what'd you make? My chicken nugget. Don't see what my uncle did. You know, just, my uncle's grilling out. I rather have a brat or something like that. So I saw my cousin. He's like, what are you doing? And it's like, I could get some lunch, dinner. It's like late. He's like, where are you going? I said, going to PF Chang. He was like, never heard of that. I was like, come with me. We're like driving. PF Chang is in Livonia, you know, 25 miles or something from Detroit. So we get there and we like turn off on Hagerty. He's like, where are we? He's like, I never been to Livonia. I was like, dude, you're 38 years old. You never been to Livonia. He's like, I don't belong out here. He's like, this isn't for me. You know, man, you've been conditioned to just stay in a spot. So like only stay in the city, only stay in the neighborhood, only stay where you've been placed. And I was like, I just wrote it down in my mind, like, there's something there. And we went to there, and I was like, I want to make this work. And I started reading some different things. My dad is a writer. And he actually was funny. He's come 360. He got hired as a professor in my school, the school he went to. So now he's teaching at this college, teaching English and compositional writing. So I was reading some stuff, and I started reading a book by Carter G. Woodson, who's the person that founded Black History. So in this book, he's talking about this. And it's this one little statement in the book, and it says, if you make a person go through a back door enough, they'll build their own back door. You won't, even if you get rid of the back door, they will build a back door. And I was like, he had been conditioned to like stay in this neighborhood, stay in Detroit. And I'm like, I'm all over the place. I'm everywhere because I feel like the world is mine. I go wherever I feel like going, because that's part of just education itself, just experiencing things, going to places. That's why I always tell people about college. The best thing about college is not the class. I mean, it's just the exposure to new people and new things. And, you know, when I got to college, the first time I met somebody from California, I was like, oh, they're different. Like, and you just, you know, you find yourself like experiencing like all of these different people and cultures. And quickly, I didn't have like that little core group of friends I came to college with from my hometown. They were people from Philadelphia, New York, California, from everywhere. And I was like, this is cool. I have this like broader education going on in my life without me even knowing it. It's just like an expansion of like who I am. It's teaching me how to critically think because I'm looking at how other people think. So I wanted to do this work, and I went to Tiff Maxey, who's a Detroit metalsmith that everybody knows. She's like a really popular Detroit artist. Wonderful, amazing woman. At her studio, telling her about this trip, telling her about this work I want to do about redlining and conditioning, and she's like, just find a different way to do it, like find something different. And so maybe like a week or so later, I'm walking to my office at the Free Press, and it's like pigeons all over the sidewalk, there's like popcorn. And, you know, pigeons are usually eating whatever is alive. And so I'm a big guy, and I'm walking, and I'm thinking, okay, they'll just move because I'm coming. The pigeons didn't move. And I started like kicking at them, and they still didn't fly away. They just like made a little red sea part for me, and like, man, just keep walking that way. We're not leaving the popcorn. And I get to the other side, and I'm like, I hate pigeons. They're always in the way, taking up spaces. And I was like, this is it. I was like, now you need to do research on pigeons. So then I started just inundating myself with like anything I could read about pigeons. I started cold calling ornithologists, ecologists, and like talking to them about bird behavior, pigeon behavior. And I learned all these amazing things about pigeons that worked right into my parallel. So pigeons are native to America, which is crazy because it's like probably the bird you see the most. And I was like, wow, I didn't know they're like native in like Europe, Asia, Africa. Pigeons were bought here in the 1600s, around the same time as slavery. They were bought here for easy source of food, but also in servitude. Because pigeons had a human relationship even back then. And pigeons are one of the few birds that don't migrate. They stay wherever you place them. And within 2 months, it imprints on their mind that this is home. That's why pigeons are so used to being racing messengers. So wherever you send them out, they come back. And so it's a thing that they're conditioned in their brain. Like if I had a little baby pigeon, I set it in this room, by 30 to 60 days, it'd be like, this gallery is my home. And a pigeon will like kill itself to get back to that space almost. And so you start thinking about how pigeons are kept, and it's like there are these coops and these little cages, and there are these very rigid, defined spaces. Almost how, you know, doctors and academia, people talk about redlining, how like these districts and like places of poverty get rid of, like food deserts, there are, higher insurance, and all these different things put in place to kind of keep people there. And so this is how this became parallel. And pigeons, believe it or not, were almost, I won't even say hunted because they weren't hunted. They were almost killed off and extinct because people were using them for trap shooting. That's why they got the name clay pigeons from, because they almost killed them off just like using them for target practice. And so, they put them in a little trap, and then they open the little door, and the bird is thinking, oh my God, I'm free. Takes off, not knowing there's a guy standing right to the left with a gun that's gonna kill him as soon as it crosses his face. And so, just thinking about all these parallels about how pigeons were treated. The interesting thing is pigeons and doves are like the same bird. Pigeon is just gray or got black markings. Same exact bird. So before they were pigeons, it was like a rock dove. Then a pigeon became the name. And now there's almost like a little movement where they want to name it a dove again because pigeons become such a horrible connotation that people hate pigeons. So wherever you go, it's like, don't feed the pigeons. It's like you see that in every city, like, don't feed pigeons. And plus, pigeons were tied to like plagues. In the early 1900s, they were like, this is why we have these plagues and diseases, pigeons are pooping. And so one of the, naturalists was telling me, the biologist was like, yeah, pigeons probably did that, but it was like, we bought pigeons here. And it was like, it's almost that similar thing, like, what do you do with something that you no longer want? Like, I now have this thing that I don't need anymore. What do I do with it? Like, where is this place in society now? And so this is how this parallel came about. And this was the first one that was called Coop Dove. And so a lot of and still to this day, a lot of the source materials, the people I know, friends with, but the other half of it is collage mugshots from the carceral system that I made. And a lot of that is just thinking about not so much people who are in jail or committed crimes, there's like a money-making mechanism around the jails and the carceral system. And how you end up seeing people who get put on tethers for like hardly any reason. But it's like they're paying like money for somebody to monitor them like all day long. And you're like, and I would see this as a journalist when I'm covering things, and we would write stories about it, and we would call them debtor's jail. How people end up in jail if they can't pay $150 traffic ticket. And you're like, should that person really be in jail? Probably not. And the chance of you putting them in there, they're never going to pay $150. Because now there's no way to work, there's no way to pay it. Their family might not be able to pay it. And I've covered a bunch of those stories. I remember sitting in there one day when I was in East Point. And this woman who was a security guard, she got put in jail because she couldn't pay a $50 fine. And I'm like, okay, so now you can't pay $50, we give you a $500 bump. So you probably can't pay that other $100. So now you're like in jail, probably for like 30, 40 days until somebody can give you $150. And so it was more about talking about different layers of things through a drawing. And over time, they kind of took on this look. And I remember one art critic said, oh, they're like fanciful, like it's just like a Harry Potter thing, some imaginative thing. But then once you figure out what it is, it's very heavy, it's very sophisticated. And I told him, I said, I did that purposefully because if I would have just did it and used the normal symbolisms, the people who need to see it would have never looked at it. So in my mind, it's like, I want to make something that's inviting for you to look at and lean into it. Then I can hit you in the head with a hammer once you're like close to it. But if I just start putting prison bars and all these other things, you're like, I don't want to deal with that. But once you get like the layering behind it, you're still having to confront those systems, those things that are questioning. That's the cool thing I always loved about murals, because murals make you confront them because they're so big. There's no way to look away from it. You're like, oh my God, there's something in front of me that's 100 feet. So I gotta kind of look at it. That's why people love them, because it's like you're confronted about some art, no matter what kind it is. So we took on these different conversations. You know, this one was called Finally Free, and I made like a helium balloon pigeon. But this was more about not finding happiness here. Like I would always hear people in my family, especially in the South, you know, they would die. People would say, oh, they're in a better place, they're finally free. And I would always be like, well, why can't you be in a better place on earth? Like, I don't want to die to have to enjoy my space and time. And, you know, just thinking about like, it's kind of like letting go and how some people only might find happiness in that. And so there's a lot of like this one is called code switching. It's all about having to sometimes play a game to like incorporate yourself a mask to fit in, and having these two birds, these two different ways of thinking. This one is called Fly Away. So you see like the handcuff, and you see, go ahead. I want this to be conversational. Raise your hand whenever you.
How big are you?
I knew that was a question, so I got it.
See, that's why we do it.
Because I think people see them and it's like, oh, there's probably these little, no, they're big. They're big graphite drawings. And that's me drawing on my couch because that's what everything is made. So I don't have a studio. I just got a drawing table like 6 months ago. But what I would do is I would buy these boards that are 60 by 40, tape the paper, which is 50 by 30 to it. And I would sit the board because it's 2 inch, 4 foot thick. I just sit on my lap and I would just turn as I draw it. So people are like, you drawing sideways, upside down. I was like, yeah, I taught myself to draw in any position. But the way I'm doing that now is I'm not necessarily looking at people's faces. I'm looking at the shapes. Like, it's not necessarily a nose, it's like a plane. It's a box here, this is a box here, this is a box here, and this is a circle. And so I taught myself to look at the shapes and drawings more so than like looking at what it actually is. And that allows me to draw upside down, backwards, any kind of direction. Because I'm looking at the abstract thing that's inside the figurative thing. And if you go to any art school, that's almost one of the first things they have you do is start drawing things upside down. Because they want you to look at the lines. And so that's how big they are. So that would have helped. And this one was kind of lightly based off that story of my cousin, because the title of it is called East Side Aviary. We live on the east side of Detroit, aviary is where they keep birds. And it was about him being locked into this one little part of town and not escaping and doing anything else. How did my cousin react to all this stuff? He was like, so you think I'm a pigeon? I was like, yeah, no. I mean, it was kind of this, but I think he understood what I was saying. Like, my whole point to him was like, don't be defined by anything. Like, you've got all of like the skill set in the world. Like, don't ever be afraid to explore and do things. Because that's the other thing that's interesting about pigeons. It's literally one of the strongest flying birds and fastest. But what's the point of having all that if you never migrate? You never go anywhere. And the literal definition of migration is to go to a better place. That's like the literal definition of it. It's like, whether it's people or birds, when people migrate, it was usually we're migrating to the north for better jobs, better money, better whatever. We're migrating birds, they're going to better weather, better place to live. And so it's interesting when I think about it, like you got a non-migratory bird that's one of the strongest flyers, but it's also been conditioned to not do it. Do I think it offended him? I don't.
No, do you think it affected how he perceives himself?
He definitely has changed for the better. But I think it was also like, what's the word? I think it was off-putting at first. When he realized that it kind of it all came from this one little story. Because I think he was like, wow, you see me in a way that's not positive. And I was like, no, I don't see you in a negative way. I saw something that's inside of you that could be changed, or you could do different things. Because I'm probably like that to my family. Like, I'm the first person that left North Carolina. Like, I'm the only one who lives away. I got 3 sisters that all live in North Carolina. And it's like, I was the person that took that job with an 81 Chevy Impala with 6 gallons of radiator coolant because the radiator was bad, and drove to Detroit with $200. Like, literally had $200 and 6 gallons of radiator coolant in a 20-year-old car. And I was like, if I just get there and the car dies, it'll be okay. My uncle will let me borrow the car he doesn't use. I was like, I gotta just jump off the cliff and grow wings. And I grew up in one of those neighborhoods. You probably see them here. Like, you've been in those neighborhoods where nobody leaves. It's like when I go home and visit now, it's like the same people on the porch. But it's just a generation of somebody different on the porch. You know, never left. Like, growing up in Winston-Salem is one of those things. Now, when I was compared to Detroit, like, people, you know, there's just industries like the North Carolina tobacco. So everybody I went to school was like, I'm going to work at a cigarette factory and like forget anything else, because even back then they were paying like $20 an hour. And it was good money. And I was like, I just know there's something bigger. There's something outside of this city that I need to see. And I think going to college was like an emphasis that you start meeting people from other places, other countries. Like, I had friends from the Caribbean, from Trinidad. I was like, I gotta move. I gotta like figure out. And the thing about being a photojournalist and being a journalist in general, it's very nomadic. People just bounce around from newspaper to newspaper to newspaper, like seeing. And by the time I got here, I had lived in New Orleans for some. I had lived in Atlanta. I had lived in New York. I had lived in these different places, and I was like, there's so much stuff to see. And even when I came to Detroit, I was like, oh, I'll probably be a couple of years and move somewhere else. I married the first beautiful woman I met, had kids, and 20 years later, I'm not get stuck in Detroit for this long. But I mean, I'm not mad about it at all. It's like, it's been like Detroit was amazing for me. But I just wanted to see more. And I think that's what I was trying to put into my cousin. Like, hey, the Whole Foods is for you too. You can go to Whole Foods. Like, don't be afraid to go to Whole Foods. It's for everybody. And sometimes it's what I call not even gentrification when they say it. I tell people, like, it's like a psychological gentrification. It's like your mind tells you don't belong in these new spaces. And you have to be able to like tell yourself that I do. Because Detroit looks nothing like it looked 20 years ago when I moved there. Like, downtown is like, oh, this is not the downtown that I moved into 20 years ago. But it's also where I'm not going to be like, oh, I don't fit in anymore. I'm like, I'm going to carve out my own space. And you know, you just have to be willing to have that type of mindset where it's still my space.
She likes to do photography anymore, or is it mostly drawings?
So my show that's going to be at the museum in Detroit is all photography. I flip back and forth. I go from drawing and printmaking to photography, and I just keep doing that. One, to save my hands. Because a lot of times after these like drawing shows, my hands are blisters and stuff. They got knots on them, and I'm like, okay, now it's time to do something else while I'm recovering. You know, and the printmaking, by the end of that, I'm cut up. I cut myself here and there. You know, never really bad. Like, I had stitches, but I cut myself a dozen times. And then the photography is more like when I'm just like no chemicals anymore. But this might sound crazy. But I think when I was using film and having to do that, I was more intentional about the photography I was doing because I couldn't see it. There was no way to sit there and look at the back of the camera to see if it was there. I had to be really dialed in and be like intentional about the settings and everything manual. And it was more like, I hope to God I got this. Because I was, you know, they would joke back in the day, they would say, you know, the older photographers would say F8 would be there because F8, everything is in focus. It's like, hey, don't even worry about it, put on F8 to shoot. And so that was the thing. And so I think I was more purposeful in that manner, but it's funny, the older I get, I try to live that way. I'm just trying to be more intentional with my life. You know, because I think the older you get, the more you think about like your mortality, you know, like what's happening to you. And I'm starting to like really feel that like, and part of it, I just had a really, my closest friend just passed at 51 from a blood clot that traveled up from his knee to the brain. So I'm like, you just never know when your time is. And I was like, it made me think more about, you know, living on purpose and not so much trying to make a living, but make a life. And, you know, not taking 1,000 camera pictures everywhere I go, but being there in that space of time. You know, I was talking to a friend, I said, sometimes you go and you got your phone camera now, you go somewhere, you get back and you're like, I don't even remember seeing anything. Because you're like so busy, like making little videos and taking photos that you don't even know, like, constantly think about where you were at. And I told him when he said it, I said, yeah, that goes back to an old rule that we had in the newspaper. If you saw it, you didn't take the picture. If you got the picture, you didn't see it. You saw it with your naked eye, you missed it. But if you got it, you didn't really see it. And it was like, go ahead.
Well, we're at.
I know, my talks are always like super, I'm so
think
sorry.
It's okay, we can stay and chat a little bit, but I do want to just acknowledge the time for those who
No,
may have to
yes.
go on, or if there's anything specific that you want to make sure to get.
No, they, like any questions, I was kind of click through and so, but my talks are like, even in Michigan, my lecture, the students are like, oh my God, can we just stay late? Because it's always so like intertwined with life lessons. But this is my only time as a pigeon for me. Like, I usually like ever draw myself.
That was you, okay.
Yep, that was me.
Okay, so what's the story?
So, I'm just thinking, so I'm like, I don't know why I just slipped my mind. It's called No Easy Rest. And it was, a bird is also resting too. When pigeons rest, they like tuck in. And it was literally just like having one of those space and times in life where like, this was during COVID. This was during George Floyd. This is when my mother got cancer during COVID. She's now in remission. So it's one of those things where I was like, I'm in this weird space where like, life just won't stop coming. And it's like, I can't even rest when it's time to rest. And especially for my mother, because like, didn't have any visitors. So she had to go to like home, you know, so she had to go to double mastectomy by herself. I'm like, in the hospital with her. And I was just like, man, I can't imagine having those type of surgeries and treatments. You're just there. And my mother just went through like a trooper. And she never really talked to me about it. She was like, oh, I feel great. You know, I think parents are always, no matter how old you get, trying to cover you some kind of way from anything. I did not know about it until my mom on a podcast for breast cancer survivors. And she's like telling this story and I'm listening to it. I'm like mortified because I don't know any of this stuff. And she's like super vulnerable with this podcast. And she's talking about how she just had this blanket. And she just prayed to God and like and asked God to be the blanket. And so she would have this blanket everywhere she went and she would hold on to it. And she talked, I listened to her talk about being prosthetic breast. And it wasn't until she went to get them that she realized she was like, I'm an amputee. Because she was sitting in this amputee clinic. And I was like, wow, I had to listen to a medical podcast to hear this from my mother, because in her mind, I asked her, I was like, why didn't you tell me this? She was like, you got your own kids, you got some with special needs. Like, I don't want to offload any more onto you. And I was like, you know, it'd have been nice to just know the type of thing, because they've always kind of treated me like a kid, or no matter how old I got. I didn't even know my mother had cancer to the day before the surgery. My sisters knew, and she was like, she called and she said, everybody in the family said I should tell you just in case something go wrong. And I'm like, what are you talking about? She was like, I have both my breasts removed for breast cancer. Dude, you can't be hiding secrets like that. Like, what did you want me to do? The next time I saw you, I wasn't gonna notice that you had both your breasts removed. Like, I'm like, you can't do that. Like, so we've now got to a space where we're like very open about things. And when my grandmother passed, like my grandmother passed months later after this, I was like, this is a crazy time. And she passed on Father's Day last year. She called me. I knew it was bad. I hate my phone wakes like 6 o'clock in the morning, because I know it never do it. And she called me. She was like, I wasn't sure like I was going to tell you this. Like, you can't hide somebody dying. Like my grandmother that I talk to all the time. And so it just became, as horrible as the pandemic was, all these things, it also fostered more vulnerability, like in conversations I would have with family. And we got closer in that way, and we were able to have harder conversations. And so my family is also showing up in my work way more now than ever. The show at the museum is all about my family. It's my mother, my grandmother, my great grandparents, my nieces and nephews. So I've done that. And even, you know, this is some of the print areas that you see that I do woodcuts and relief work. And this was a show I did last year in Detroit called Up from the Wood Clay. Anybody in North Carolina, all our dirt was from the clay. And it was about my family. This was one of the first things I started doing. A cousin of mine who got baptized in the creek down from my great grandparents' house. And so the piece is called I Know It Was the Blood. Because like you get the red color, you get the baptismal thing. That's how I saw people get baptized as a kid. When my grandparents would just get baptized in this creek. And so that was kind of, you know, this is my great uncle, and he spent a career in the Air Force. He would always talk about how hard it was to be in the Air Force in the 50s and 60s and 70s as a Black officer. And so this piece is called Red Clay Black Skin. And what you can't see here is the skin in his body is dyed black alligator skin, like bone out. So it's like really hard material. So it's a lot of things from my upbringing. You know, sometimes it's called first and third. And I was telling somebody growing up in that little town where my grandparents were from, it was so tiny. Like Good Heart, it was like they couldn't have a full-time pastor, so they only went to church on the first and third week. And he pastored someone else on the second and fourth. So growing up, it was like going to church every other week because you couldn't afford a full-time minister. So there's those little stories. It's the piece. Actually, Wayne State commissioned me to do this. It was right after George Floyd died. And they were like, we should make a piece about like your mental space, their feelings, what's going on. It's called Resting in Black. And what they did was they took this woodcut I did, it was like this big, and blew it up, and it was on a billboard, like 50 feet downtown. So you can drive it down Woodward. This is massive. This is on a massive billboard. And they called it Up in the Air. So what they did during COVID was they commissioned every 2 months an artist from all around the country to do gigantic billboard pieces so people could still interact with work that, you know, brought about thought, but just do it outside. So yeah, this is kind of where I'm at. This is one of the last pieces I did. It's called Tapestry of My Soul. It's 6 feet relief carving. My great grandfather, my grandmother, my dad, and all of these things that represent was the state bird in North Carolina. My grandmother quilted us to see the patchwork. See the little shed that my uncle lived in, shotgun house. My great uncle's hands came, the sunflowers representing the dirt road of her house. She planted sunflowers all that path, so when you drive, there's really tall sunflowers. But this is now owned. It's two main. Mercedes-Benz has one in their headquarters, and Wake Forest University bought the other one. So yeah, I've been doing installation work. This was my take on the clay pigeons, but I just made them really big, so they're like 26 around. And it's called I hate more than 9 minutes, because in the sport, if a bird gets away, it's called a bird away. But normally that doesn't happen. So the 3 on the wall in the gallery represent the birds that got away. This is at University of Michigan Institute for Human. That's what they kind of look like.
Rashaun, what are you going to be showing if you're showing that live?
It's the last bird show. It's the last functional bird show I will do.
Oh, I'm just staring at that.
Done with it. I mean, they're super popular, but I'm an artist who like, just because things get acquired by me. There's 14 of those birds in the Smithsonian. They bought 14, so you go into the 4th floor, like the whole wall is birds. And the galleries, of course, you know, they're never happy when you like want to get something that's very popular and get acquired from institutions. But I just got the work I want to make. And it's just, you know, I don't want to be known for one thing. I remember being in Detroit, I was like walking the gallery as a 10-year-old kid, and we were like talking. I'm Rashaun, what do you like the pigeon dude? I was like, nope. It's like I don't want to be the pigeon dude. I was like, tons of other work to make. But this is how installation is drawn into a 7-foot pigeon coop. And so in this pigeon coop is a perch made out of weighted flags. On the flag, there's pigeon spikes. Spikes will keep certain birds away or certain things. And so the piece was called A Perilous Perch. About how different groups of people have to kind of figure out how to live in America. You know, it can be like a perilous place for them. And when you actually go up to the coop or the whole gallery, when we went to a pigeon recorded sounds of pigeons and coops, so you could hear the pigeons like thrashing against the wild wire, against the chicken wire. So you would hear that when you were in the gallery, like the cooing and the smashing against the coop. So that was very simple. And I remember someone could have made the flag a little cleaner and you cut it. And I was like, even though I'm making this statement, this is how it is. Even though I'm making this statement about America being uncomfortable spaces for certain people, even be it a lot of times, I didn't want to cut the flag because almost all of me and my family were like veterans. So it's that thing where you're like, I'm proud to be an American, but I'm also not happy with some of the stuff that America does. And some of the things that I deal with. Like my grandfather was a medic in the Korean War. Never even knew he was a medic in the war. Never talked about it. Never told me he was in the military. He died and somebody's playing taps and folding flags. I'm like, what's going on? And I'm like, didn't know it. And I asked my grandmother, I'm like, he never talked about it. She said, it's just a horrible time for him to be in the military. He was like, he was so mistreated, even though he's a medic and saving people. So when he was done with it, he was done with it. Like there was a picture in the house of anything. And so it's kind of that juxtaposition of like, you know, I wonder what my grandfather thought about like being a medic in the war, you come home and you're like still mistreated. And thinking about how that had an effect on him. But yeah, this is my last work. My latest installation was Virginia. They commissioned me to do some drawings. They called me because they were like enthralled with the birds. And they said, hey, we want to do this thing, but it's going to be on land that was used for slavery. And what they bought slaves, traded slaves, dropped slaves off. But we also want to talk about the land as it is now. So my thing was I took a list of all the birds that inhabited that area of Virginia, great blue heron, turkey vulture, all these things. And I put them on the heads of my family. When my family is talking about the ancestors in our lives that worked that land as slaves. And so they took these little drawings and blew them up to 20 feet. They were all through these properties, all through this land. So people would walk through at night and light shine on them. And so that was what you saw was my son. That's kind of who I am.
Thank you so much for coming out.
Rashaun, can you tell us one more time when your show opens in Detroit?
October 29th. From the heat. And so I told you it was photography in my family, but the photography was a 6-foot church band. So they're being fabricated, like with carpenters and other people working with me. And I wanted to do that because that was one of my fondest memories growing up as a kid, is like these church bands they would give you. And most of the church bands had images of like heroes or like Black families. I was telling some people that was the first time I ever or even saw who JFK was. He was on church bands in all the Black churches. JFK, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, you would see these people where they would be like, you know, identified as heroes, civil rights warriors, these things. Or you would see what I was telling people the other day, they call the Holy Trinity, which was the Black community, the Holy Trinity was Jesus, Martin Luther King, and JFK. So you would see these churches like Martin Luther King, Jesus in the middle of JFK. And you would see that in the houses. My grandmother had that in her house. My great grandmother was like, I don't know, she got these 3 oval pictures. It was like Martin Luther King, Jesus, and JFK. And it was like, that was like the Holy Trinity, they would say, for like Black people. So this is me kind of replicating church things with my family. And the interior of the gallery is being turned into a church. So there'll be pews and tambourines and all these different things. And it's just hard relief from the heat of the world, the heat of like situations. But these are the things that bring me joy. Like the fans, like great cookouts, like all these spaces and places that bring me joy. So that's what you'll be seeing. And the show in LA, the last bird show, September 24th. I've been doing here is finishing the last 3 birds in good heart. Next day, air flying out to LA. So that's where I'm at. And I'll be going to grad school at Cranbrook, so I'll be a 45-year-old student. Trying to release kids and the whole, like, honored to be here. I had like such an awesome time. I seen quite a lot of nature. I saw a coyote yesterday. I was like, oh, it's a coyote outside the window. Like chasing a deer. And I was like, oh, this is cool. It's like, and it's been a great space to like just focus in and do work. I met incredible people. Went to Birchwood Country Club, played golf yesterday. You know, had some amazing dinners. Bill and Sue, an amazing host. Had a dinner with the family here, and I went to dinner at 6, and I left at 1 in the morning. I was like, it was just like, they were like, it's the best conversation we ever had, but it was me. It was more like a two-sided. It was like they were having a conversation and I'm having a great conversation with them because I found out they used to design toys for a living. And I'm a huge toy collector, so I could not get enough of talking to them about the toy. And they made all the toys that would have been the toys in the 80s that I played with as a kid. So I was like, oh my God, you made Star Wars toys and all this stuff. And I was like, really geeking out about like the whole thing. I think I've told everybody in the world I know, like, oh my God, people are good hearted. They were like engineers for Kenner toys and easy bake ovens and all this stuff. They made all of it. They were like in these places. So it's just been a phenomenal experience. And it's brought me so much joy. come to a place that's new for me and to make myself comfortable being uncomfortable. And bring work that I want people to see and work that's being done in Detroit and other places. You know, just an awesome time.